This is a Chuki Beat production.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy SHADOWxlxHUNTER here, back with my first video in about 5 months. I've been MIA for a while here because I've been working on some design stuff that I'm getting into, doing some 3D design, and that's been taking over a lot of my life. So I'm going to sprinkle some images across the screen here of some vehicles I've been working on, and that's what I've been doing. Thankfully though, the channel has still been growing miraculously. We officially broke 100 subscribers a little bit ago, which I'm blown away by that, especially since I haven't posted a video in 5 months. So thank you to the 104, 105 people that have been subscribed to me to this point. And I promise I'm going to start putting out videos a little bit more often now. So what's today's video? Today's video is a update to my how to tune drift cars in Forza 7. Excuse me while I go off track. So I'll be tuning this Selby GT350R Mustang for drifting. A quick rundown is it's been fully upgraded motor-wise with a twin screw blower, so it has about 980 horsepower. It's running max width sport tires, has full suspension, it has weight reduction, it does not have a roll cage, and I think that, and it has full driveline upgrades too. So it's pretty much fully upgraded except for it's not on race tires and it doesn't have a roll cage, and it's not twin turboed and it's supercharged instead. So why am I redoing this video for 2018? Well, the first one I didn't really care for. I mean, I put it out there because I thought people needed help, but I've gone back and since watched it, since I've grown on my YouTubing and figuring out how I like to do videos, and I'm just going to say that first video isn't all that great. It's doing amazing. It has over 7,000 views, which is outstanding, especially for the fact that I only have 100 subscribers, but I still think I could do a lot better. So this video is going to be going a bit more in depth, and I'm going to try to explain some stuff. I am going to be doing some Microsoft Paint diagrams for you to kind of help explain what each little individual thing does and how I set up my cars. So let's get right into this. This has no tune on it. The only thing I've done is change tire pressures. So we'll take a look at that real quick. Now, why did I change tire pressure? Well, you want to get the maximum use out of your tires. So you gotta adjust the tire pressure because as they get hot, the tire pressure increases. So usually on sport tires, I'd run about 28.5 pounds of pressure, or pounds of air, however you want to describe it, PSI in the tires for all four corners when I'm building a grip car. However, when it comes to a drift car, those rear wheels are spinning all the time. They're always sliding, which means they're going to be a lot hotter. So we actually lower the rear tire pressure down quite a bit to try to control how hot how much pressure buildup we have in the rear tires. So that's the only thing I've done so far, and I did change the gearing as well from the I think it gave me a 301 rear final drive ratio, which made fourth gear go to like 180 miles an hour. So I wanted to get a little bit more gear control, so I put it to a 373. So that is where we're at, and this car is pretty solid right now. It's very, very fast, as you can see. And it does have pretty decent control, but there is some stuff I want to tune out of it. Like, it has a lot of slop, or not really slop, but it seems like it shifts its weight quite a bit. So like I'll be drifting and I'll go to do a transition like that, and it feels like the weight just carries it right around, and sometimes it's hard to recover from. I will mention that this car weighs exactly 3,000 pounds with this setup, so that's where we're at with this. So let's start talking about some suspension stuff. So I guess the first thing we're going to start talking about is alignment. Let me get around this corner and I'll pull up the alignment menu too and start going through some stuff. This car is just so much fun to drive. I've been drifting since Forza 4, so I have a little bit of experience. Even without a tune, this car is great, but I want to see how much better we can get it with a tune. Alright. Tuning. So we talked about tire pressures. Now gearing, that's going to really depend on what your car has for a power plant and how you like to drive and how much power it has. The more power the car has, the more you can get away with a longer gear for a faster car. However, if it has a lot of turbo lag, you might want a shorter gear, so that way if you say you're coming out of a high speed corner in a gear that's too high, or I should say a low speed corner in a gear that's too high, you'll get a lot of turbo lag depending on the motor setup. So you might want a shorter gear so that we don't have to worry about turbo lag. However, in a V8 build like this with 900 horsepower and a twin screw supercharger, it has all kinds of torque, so I don't really have to worry about it too much. But I did end up going with a 373 gear because this car revs out to like over 9,000 RPMs. I think it's either like almost 9,000 or over 9,000, so it's ridiculous. This car revs so high, so that's also another thing you gotta consider. Not all cars are gonna have the same rear gear ratio, but play with it until you kind of feel it. The shorter the gears, so the higher the number, the easier it is for the tires to spin, but the slower you're gonna end up going. Now onto alignment. So what is camber? I'm gonna throw up a diagram right here. I'm recording this while I'm playing and not while I'm at the computer editing, so I'm going to try to sync up my diagrams with what I'm talking about. So what camber is, it's how much the wheels, if you're looking at them from the front, are pointing inward, or are tipped inwards or tipped outwards. So negative camber is tipped inwards, and you want negative camber because when you go around a corner, the tire actually stretches, and you want to make that contact patch as even as possible, or as square as possible. So when you set up a car for turning, you will put negative camber into it. However, with a drift car in Forza, which is where it detaches from real life, the more camber you have, this is seemingly the more steering angle you get. However, if you go too high, the car can either be twitchy or will understeer a lot. So I usually stick around -3 degrees on my drift cars. The rear is kind of the same idea, except for you don't have any steering angle benefit. It's really more how much grip do you want to have. If you have a very low horsepower car, you might want to put 5 degrees of negative camber to get that contact patch as small as you can. However, usually in a turning setup or a grip setup, I would put about 1.8 degrees when I'm setting up a circuit race car. So that's just kind of what I stick with, and then I adjust from there on how much grip it has. Again, the higher horsepower cars, the less you have to worry about overcoming the rear grip, so you actually might want more. Toe. This is how, if you're looking at the tires from the top view, how much they point inwards or point outwards. So toe out means if you're looking straight, or if you're looking at the front going down a straight, you know, the steering wheel straight, and you're looking from the top of the like a bird's eye view down, the toe out would mean the tires are pointing away from each other at the front, and then toe in would mean they're pointing towards each other at the front. Now when you're talking about toe, you also got to think about steering, and there's a thing called Ackerman angle. I don't know how Forza has it set up, but when you turn your wheels, one wheel has to have a different steering arc than the other wheel, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to make it around a corner without feeling chatter or whatever. But the same reason why you do a limited slip versus a locked differential, because one wheel has to be moving faster than the other in the rear end in order to make the same turn. So when we're talking about Ackerman angle and steering, when you're going around a regular track, you might want a little bit of toe out, because that will help you with turning, and then it will also help the inside tire have a little bit more of a angle arc than the outside tire, which will help you go around the corner. Throw that out the window when it comes to Forza drifting, because now we're instead of the back end trailing the car, you know, here, I'll go around the corner here real quick. No, I'm just going to apply this setup and I'll show you. So in regular racing, which is where I was talking about toe out, when you're just trying to grip around a corner, the back end of the car follows the front, right? So just like that. However, when we're drifting, the back end of the car isn't, and we're counter steering. So now you got to think about how the steering axis works. So if you have toe out and you're turning, then the inside tire, you know, like we went around that first corner a regular way, the inside tire is going to have a little bit more steering angle versus the outside tire, which is going to help you get around the corner. But now when you're counter steering, the outside tire is going to have less steering angle than the inside tire, which means you're going to be dragging the outside tire. So what we'll actually do is we'll set a little bit of toe in, because now when you're counter steering, the outside tire again, take a look at this diagram and I'll have some pictures so that way you can see what I'm saying. So I'm going to go into photo mode here and kind of show you what I'm talking about. So when we were going regularly, that inside tire right here would have to be turned in more than the outside tire in order to make it go around the corner better. However, now that we're drifting, the back end of the car isn't in the same position and we're actually counter steering. So now we're going to want this inside tire to have more steering angle than this outside tire, right? Because that will help us rotate around the corner. So do you kind of understand what I'm saying now? That this tire has to have more steering angle in order to go around in the same arc and rotate better. So we'll set toe in to have this tire pulled in more. So that way we can rotate around the corner and follow the same arc steering wise, and that we'll just, and then we'll just control the back end with our throttle. I hope that makes sense to you. You can kind of PM or leave a comment below if you need a little bit more explanation help. I'm trying to convey this as best as I can to my knowledge. So that's how toe out or toe in would work on the front. Now on the rear, on the rear it's the same idea. If you put toe in, the front of the tires are going to point inwards. If you put toe out, the front of the tires are going to point outwards. However, you don't have to worry about steering. Now this is more for forward grip. If you put a little toe in on the back tires, the tires will get more forward traction per se. That's the idea behind it. So I usually put between -0.5 and a -0.7 degrees of toe in, depending on how much horsepower I have and how much traction I want. And on the front, I'll usually put between -0.3 toe in or -0.5 toe in. So I think I'm going to go with 0.5 just to go with this one. Caster. What is caster? If you ever looked at a shopping cart and you push a shopping cart and the wheel flips around and it goes, you know, in line, but then you pull the shopping cart and it flips around the other way, that's kind of what caster is dealing with. This is where the wheel sits in regards to the steering, or in regards to an axis point. So when you have low caster, it's like you're going straight up and down the center of the wheel, and that's where the wheel is going to steer from. However, if you have high positive or if you have a higher caster degree, which usually I run 7 degrees with my drift cars, it is going to rotate on a different angle when turning. So I'm going to put up a diagram right here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. The thing to note with caster is when you turn your wheel with no caster, you don't get any camber gain. So you don't gain any camber, negative or positive, when you're going through your steering cycle. So with caster, with no caster, this is what it looks like. And so when you steer your wheel like this outside wheel, or the passenger wheel in this case, will not gain any camber at all. However, with a higher caster degree, this outside wheel here, this passenger wheel, will gain a lot more negative camber when going through the cycle, and you'll gain a little bit of positive camber on the on this inside wheel here. So when you're thinking about that, you will, if you have higher caster, you will be able to run less static camber and still be able to get more camber when you're in steering, when you're turning. So it depends on how you like your setups. The other thing about caster is stability. So again, with no caster, you are riding right up on top, so you might get again, where this really comes in is more real life than Forza. You got to really worry about the camber for Forza. You don't really have to worry about braking deflection. So I'm not going to go too far into this, but when you hit the brakes and you don't have any caster, your steering, your wheels, depending on steering axis and steering geometry, they might actually point inwards or outwards. So, or when you're going in a straight line, they might be easier to upset. However, like when you're looking at a shopping cart, because of the steering, because of the caster there, when you push the shopping cart forward, the wheels snap in line with where you're going, and so now you have a stable steering system. So with caster, you get more straight line stability the higher the number is. Again, to a certain degree, but that's the general idea here. I hope that helps. Again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them. So now let's talk about anti-roll bars. Now what this does is it ties the left and the right side of the suspension to each other. You can pull up the help here, and this kind of gives you a general idea of what it does. But think about it, so if you have an independent rear suspension, you know, the one wheel, the inside wheel, or the right wheel can move independently of the left wheel, and one will go up and one will stay down, or you know, the other way. However, if you have like a solid axle suspension, the front can compress, or if you move one side, the other side gets effective. It's the same kind of idea with an anti-roll bar. The stiffer the anti-roll bar, the less separation each side will have from another. So if you have an independent rear suspension, but you have the stiffest rear anti-roll bar in the world, it'll actually act like a solid axle car. In theory, that's kind of the thing we're getting at. So you want to dial in how much compliance that you want. Now the stiffer the rear anti-roll bar, the more oversteer the car is going to have, and the softer the front anti-roll bar to an extent, the more oversteer the car can have, or the less understeer the car will have. So usually when I'm setting up my anti-roll bars for drifting, I soften the front a little bit just to get a little bit more steering. However, I will also soften the rear because I want that rear end to be able to soak up some bumps and not worry about it being too upset, because again, we have all this power. Like I said, this car has 980 horsepower. I'm not really worried about trying to inflict oversteer. But if we're running a low horsepower car, I might crank up the rear anti-roll bar because the car has less power to overcome. But in this sense, I'm looking for forward grip in this car, so I want that rear suspension to be able to soak up bumps and kind of firmly plant the wheels to the ground. Again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments. Your spring rate, this also depends on how you like your wheels and tires and how you like everything to be set up. You know, usually for a rule of thumb when setting up a circuit race car, you will take your weight and divide it by, or multiply it by the weight differential, or you know, your front to rear weight distribution. So if you have a 3,000 pound car with 53% front weight distribution, you'll take that 3,000 pounds, times it by 0.53, and then, or multiply it by 0.53, and then you will set up everything that way. You'll give you a number, and then you'll divide that by 2, and that will give you where your front spring rate should be, roughly. That's just a general rule of thumb. However, I usually set my drift cars up based on feel. So the softer the front springs, the more front grip you'll have. the harder the front springs, the easier it is going to be to overcome the tire's grip. So I'll usually use that rule of thumb for the front springs. Maybe I'll put it a little bit stiffer. Then the rear springs is, again, it's a little bit different when you're talking about drift cars, because you want that rear end to squat and soak up to get that forward momentum. So that way, you know, the tires can have a little bit of wiggle room to move up and down, and you'll be able to put more traction to the ground. Because again, the stiffer the spring, the more likely it is to overcome the tire's traction limit. So I might soften up the rear spring here a little bit, to give it a little bit more squat, give it a little bit more bite. You got to be careful though, because if you put it too soft, when you turn the, you flick the car in and you load up that back rear suspension, it might kind of flop over on you, and if you say you're going to spin out, you might actually lose the car because there's too much weight carrying that outside, on the outside of the car in the rotation. Therefore, you can't recover. It's a fine line. You'll play with it, and you'll figure out what works best for you. Ride height, I want my cars as low as possible because stance life. The dampening. Now, what is dampening? Again, I'm going to throw up a diagram here to kind of explain this briefly and give you a visual aid. Rebound stiffness is after this. Well, I feel like they put this backwards, but so bump stiffness, when the wheel goes over a bump and the suspension compresses, this is how much dampening the spring has for compression. If you ever like took out a pencil spring and kind of just compressed it and then took your finger off it and just watched it flop around or spring back, that's dealing with rebound. But bump stiffness is also how much resistance there is. So it's kind of, in theory, like a increased spring rate. So say your spring rate is 800 pounds, but you have a super stiff shock in there as well. It actually might act like a 900 pound spring. Just, that's not exactly technically correct, but that is a way to think about it. So this is how fast the spring is able to move up or compress. On the front, again, you want to have a little bit compliant, but at the same time, you're really worried about the back shock in this case, because you want it to compress easier to put that traction down. So this is roughly where I set it up, and then I'll tweak it from there per car. Now, rebound is the opposite. So after the spring compresses, again, like I was talking about, if you took like a mechanical pencil spring out, or like a spring from a pen, and you compressed it and then you just took your finger off of it, how it just kind of springs and it goes all over the place. It might wobble or do whatever it wants to do, but all the energy instantly comes back. This is how much resistance that has. So it's kind of like if you pinched a spring between your fingers and then you just slowly let it out. This is kind of what you're doing with rebound. So you want to control that spring, and it also goes by weight of the car. But what we'll do here is we'll set it a little bit higher in the front and then a little bit higher in the rear, because we don't want that spring to unload all that compression that we just put onto it. We want it to stay compressed a little bit longer, and so that's how we'll do this. Is we'll increase the rebound stiffness, so that way that spring can stay compressed and the load can stay on the rear of the car. If that makes any sense to you. Again, here's a couple diagrams to take a look at to hopefully give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Again, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. This car doesn't have any exchangeable downforce, tunable downforce, I should say, so we're not going to worry about that. However, the more downforce you have, the faster you're going, the more the car gets pressed into the ground. So that's just one thing to think about. Braking force, usually for my brakes, the way I drift, I like to use the brakes to tuck in the front tires, or give control how much angle I have. So if I throw a car into a drift, but it doesn't have as much angle as I want, I might keep my fingers on the gas or on the throttle, and then I might tap the brakes to bring in the front brake, or to reel in and give the back more slip. because it'll slow down the front and the back still has a high speed, so it'll give it more rotation. That's just how I drive. Brake force is kind of up to you. I usually do around 105% braking pressure. Differential, again, this is more on kind of like what we talked about in the beginning with tow, how when you're going around a regular corner, like a parking, especially like in a parking lot, the wheels need to move. One wheel needs to be able to move faster than the other. Otherwise, you like hear chirping noise because the tire's skipping or something because they're locked. So that's what a differential, limited slip differential will do. It's really on feel at this point. I'll usually do around 75%. The lower the horsepower car, the more I'll increase this percent of lock. So if it's a really, really low horsepower car and I've done as much as I can to try to get it to drift, but I'm kind of still struggling a little bit, I might lock the rear differential, so 100%, 100%. And that will kind of that'll make each wheel move the same speed as the other in the rear end. If that makes sense to you, I hope it does. Again, leave me a comment and I can try to explain it the best I can. So there we go. I think that covers pretty much everything. I will jump and do another couple laps here and try to refine this. So if you I hope that, like I said earlier, I hope this really helps you kind of get an understanding of what each of these tuning, that was a little bit of freeze lag there, that was kind of unfortunate. But I hope this helps you understand what each of these tuning measurements does, and I hope that helps you tune your cars better. If you would like, I will share this tune so you can get it and try it out for yourself. Excuse me while I'm too worried about talking and not worried about driving. You can use, most of my numbers are pretty consistent for every car I drive that's front engine. I do tweak numbers a little bit for rear engine or mid-engine cars when it comes to my drift tuning. But if you kind of understand what I laid out for you on how all the tuning stuff works, you might be able to figure out how to tune cars when it has different weight distributions. Or if you feel the car doing something, you can kind of understand how to do it. If there are any cars you want to see me build or tune, I'd be happy to do that. Just let me know in the comments below, and I will be getting out videos more frequently now. So thank you guys for watching. I will see y'all in the next video.